my name is Bree, and I'll be presenting this with my colleague Danny. I'm from Uni SQ in Toowoomba, and Danny is from University of Sunshine Coast. And we're both members of the PASS-CR team, and we're hoping to give you a bit of insights on how to best craft your research intent. There have been many sessions already about our PASS-CR scholarship scheme. And if you haven't had a chance already, here are some links to some websites where you can find more information. And we can also have this available at the end, or if you have any questions. So those of you who have attended these seminars before would have recognised this figure. And we're now at the point of the research proposal. So we've gone through, hopefully you've checked your eligibility for the scholarship program. Hopefully you've identified a research topic to discuss with your supervisors, and now you're attending this research proposal, research intent training session. So the first thing that today we'll do, the overview will be communicating with potential supervisors, how to best populate your research intent form, ensuring you leave enough time for review and feedback from your supervisors, and common mistakes in proposal writing and how to avoid them. So this is the form that you would have seen for the research intent for this scholarship scheme. So I've got both logos on the form just to show you what it looks like. So if you're applying to FNU, you just see the FNU logo. And if you're applying to USP, then just the USP logo. This is the second part of the form, so the guts of what is in the intent. And I'll go through these different sections today and attempt to give you some insight on what to include. There's not currently a reference section in the form, but we will modify this and make that available to you so you can add references to your methodology area, etc. So the most important thing on this slide is that if you haven't already spoken with a potential supervisor at FNU or USP, as well as an ACR project leader supervisor, then you do need to stop filling out this form and arrange a meeting with them first. You do need to discuss your ideas with them and ensure it's relevant to their project. And please be mindful that this research intent form should be co-constructed with your potential supervisors. Do ensure that you send your proposal with enough time for your supervisors to edit. Let them know it's coming so they can set aside time. You have to remember that your supervisors are busy people, and they'll need at least 1 week, ideally 2 weeks, to edit the proposal. Also bear in mind that the supervisors have no obligation to sign a research intent form that they have received last minute. So if the application date is looming and you send it to them on the weekend, please be mindful that they do not have to sign this research intent form. So lots of time to prepare and lots of time for the supervisors to edit is required. So just some general information on the research proposal and what it's for before we dive into the specifics of that intent form. So a research proposal explains the nature and extent of your planned research. So you need to, it's able to explain the feasibility and logical foundations of your project. It shows a well-focused set of research questions and set of research objectives, and maybe a hypothesis depending on your area of research. And it also details the academic literature on your topic. Some more general information is that the research proposal shows an understanding of the current research and the issues of your topic. So you need to look at recent work, so the last 5 to 10 years, as well as citing historical work where necessary. And you need to be able to provide a justification of your project through the literature. So use the literature available to tell a story, to highlight the gaps in the research and where your work will fit in. This is really important to sell your proposal and your idea to the panel reviewing your proposal. You also need to be able to match the methods and your research questions effectively. So think about, can you really achieve your objectives of what you're proposing to do? And are your proposed methods up to date with current research? So it would not be useful to be using a very old, outdated technique if there was new technology available. So into each section on the research intent form. So the research background or your topic. So your topic addresses a significant problem and therefore advances the state of knowledge in that field. So when you're writing this part of the intent, you need to ask yourself, what is it that I'm interested in finding out about this topic? So this sets the scene with specific background information. It highlights the research gaps briefly. It states what you're going to do, what you might find, and shows the importance of your topic to the field of the research. So you have to be quite succinct in the writing here. You do only have 300 words, but make it tight and specific, and it'll be easy for the panel to read and to examine essentially. So continuing on the background of the topic, you do need to clearly justify why your research topic is important. So has the work been done before? Has it been done in another Pacific Island country, but not Fiji or Samoa? Has an issue or topic or problem changed? And now you need to do the research to update that knowledge. And you also might want to anticipate any problems or limitations of your research. So that sort of shows forward thinking of what you might be able to achieve and how that can contribute to the field, but still more research could be required. So your aims and objectives. This needs to be the first thing that's defined, and there could be multiple aims and objectives. So remember that your research aim is the main goal or overarching purpose, what your study will answer. So aims are long-term outcomes. Why is the research needed? What is this research about? And how are you going to do it? So do take some time crafting that research aim. Continuing on from aims and objectives, your objectives specify how your study will go about answering the aim. So objectives are short-term outcomes, and it's easy to make a numbered list of your objectives, depending on throughout your study, you might have 3 or 4 or more, but you do need to make them SMART. So in this figure below, SMART goals or objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So your objectives end up being milestones that help you to achieve your research through your study. So always think about the SMART acronym to make sure that you know that you can hope to achieve your potential objective through your project. So research questions are based on the research problem or topic and your objectives. And essentially they are feasible ways or directions to address your topic. So a little bit more detail potentially than in the objective. And it's best to think about your questions being SMART as well. And again, use a list of a numbered list or dot points to help flesh out your ideas and make it quite clear in your proposal what you hope to achieve and how you're going to achieve it with your questions. The literature review, the dreaded literature review. It's often the hardest part. And remember that the literature review is not just a list and summary of the research out there, which you often see in proposals and general lit reviews in students' work, but it's a critique and a critical synthesis of what's there. So you need to highlight that there are gaps in the field that you're working on, and these gaps need to be filled. And remember, this is quite short, so you can be quite targeted in your literature review, and you're able to go into more detail if your research intent is accepted. Now, you might have several areas or ideas to tie in together. So if you've got, for example, a crop and a pathogen and a biocontrol agent, all those areas are massive alone. So you need to be very careful in how you distill that information. So do take your time to link these areas and to tell the story of your research area. And of course, with all these sections, you do need to get feedback and work with your potential supervisor to address these. So you need to develop a series, a theme or a series of themes from your broad reading. Do avoid quotations and do avoid beginning paragraphs with Jones argues, misstates, because these often you end up losing your writer's authority of the work to others. So do spend time providing an overview in your own voice, your own words. Methodology. So it's easy if you know what you're doing, but if you don't know yet, and most of you will be in that position where you're not actually sure all the methods that you need to employ, the best way to do that is to read lots of papers and reports, read other proposals and other theses, either master's or PhD, and do ask colleagues and your supervisor, of course, to make sure you're on the right track. You need to remember that your methodology, although brief in this section, needs to be in enough detail that the panel examining the proposal is confident that you know what you're doing, or you know where to get help. So for instance, you might have a particular technique that you cannot achieve at your university, but you can go to another research institute to do that part of the lab work or the field work. So if that is stated explicitly, then the panel is, again, confident that you have a method and you have a way to achieve that method. Now, do include a data analysis component. So you need to show that you've thought about what kind of data that you might collect, so you can use the literature to inform this, and how you might go about analysing your data. So at this point, it's going to be quite brief because you don't know the exact details of what you're going to include, but do spend some time finding out from other papers that have been published of how they analyse their data. So research outcomes. It is important that you define what or who will benefit from the research or the information or the knowledge that comes out of the proposed project, and be specific about this. Maybe it's a new method that you've developed so other researchers in the area or similar areas can benefit. Or maybe it's smallholder farmers, commercial farmers, industry, women and children. Often it'll be several of these. So think about the important outcomes and where your research fits in, and that will also help to essentially sell your research proposal, your research intent. So that's it from me. We are now going to move to my colleague Danny, who will talk about the common proposals, common mistakes in proposal writing and how to avoid them.
Thanks for that, Bree. And yeah, so just to give you a little bit of a background info, I was in charge in last year's intake to help Linda West put together all the applications. So I was actually going through a lot of the applications and the research proposals. So what I did for this presentation was just go back to the intake that we had last year and try to pick up some of the common issues or common mistakes that we were finding in some of those research intent forms and applications, to give you a little bit of a heads up of the things you should be kind of looking into as you put together these documents. So before I get started, I just wanted to quickly get to know you a little bit better. So you'll see that I'm launching a quick poll. So if you could just read on that question. So I'm interested in knowing what's your previous experience applying for the scholarships. Want to know if you've applied before and have been unsuccessful, or if you're applying for the first time. And hopefully we do have, I planned that, I was assuming we were going to have a couple people who got the scholarship last year, and I saw a couple of familiar names in the participants list. So yeah, let's have a quick look at the results. So still a couple people haven't submitted their response. I'm going to wait until we hit at least 70% of responses. Cool. There we are. So I'm going to share the results. So hopefully you can see the results now in the screen. So very interesting. It's good to see that the majority of you are applying for the first time. So yeah, this is a really great opportunity to get things started the right way. And I can see there's a few of you who applied last year and were unsuccessful. So hopefully by looking into what Bree had just presented, it'll give you some ideas of things you can improve in your current application form. So as Bree had said, the first two steps is really making sure you're eligible. That's when we assess the applications. That's exactly what we look first. Even before we look into your research proposal or your research topic, we actually go and make sure that you're eligible. So that's your first screening. Make sure, as Bree said, that by the time you start working on this intent form, you've actually checked your eligibility. And then once that's all clear, then of course it is about making sure that you put forward the best research intent that you possibly can put. So excellent, thanks for that. So now I'm gonna ask you to do a second quick poll. Bree mentioned about the importance of interacting with your supervisors. So don't worry, this quick poll is anonymous. I don't get to see the people who replied for each answer. But yeah, just select if you've already know your supervisor quite well, you've been working with them, perhaps you did your undergrad with them and you have already established a relationship with them, or if you kind of in that stage where you're just building that relationship, you've sent your ideas and received initial feedback on your proposal, or if you are still in that process where you haven't contacted your supervisor yet. So again, I'm going to wait until we have at least 70% of responses. We're almost there. A few people still making those clicks. All right, so here we are. So hopefully now you can see the results there. So yeah, a bit worrying that we have about 60% of people who have not contacted your supervisors yet. I suppose it's good that you joined this session because I really want you to finish this session knowing that that interaction needs to happen as soon as possible. Ideally yesterday or 1 month ago, but you're still in that stage where you can start building that up. You don't need to see this process as a process where you sit down, you work on your application and then send it through. There should be several iterations of exchange with your supervisors because that will give you two things. So first, it will guarantee that you start building a good relationship with the person. If you're doing a PhD, this is going to be like a 3-4 year relationship. I often joke that it's almost as important as a good marriage. So start building that really good relationship early on. And then it will also allow you to refine the ideas with your supervisors. So yeah, the majority of you who haven't moved into this step, as soon as you finish this session, go and contact your potential supervisors and start building that relationship.
So Danny, one extra thing to add to that. It might be daunting to contact the supervisors, but do remember that we are all humans, and we want to support you, or the advisor want to support you and be a part of this process with you. So simple email, and you can set up a Zoom meeting. Yeah, you do need to do that immediately. Thanks, Danny.
Yeah, and it's important for you to also know you're not catching them out of the blue. They are part of this process. They have been inducted in all the process. So they're kind of, in a way, waiting for you guys to reach out and to make that connection. Alrighty, so let's get started. Oh, Brie, can you move the slides for me? Bit of a technical.
I'm trying to.
Oh, it's not moving. I
No.
think you need to click on the slide and move it again.
Bear with me.
There we go. So I always try to think, I have a few messages for you, but I always try to think what's the best way to make it memorable, to make sure that at the end of this, oh, go back. Yeah,
Sorry.
At the end of this, you remember what my messages were. And as I said, I went through this process of looking at what were the common mistakes. So I tried to put together 5 of the most common mistakes I kept finding in those research intents, and tried to assign like a character for each mistake. So the first one I'm going to talk to you about is the superhero researcher. And one thing that I'm going to say to you so that you don't feel bad is like, I feel like I have been these 5 mistakes throughout my life. And sometimes even in my academic career, I still make these mistakes. So these are common things that happen when you write, when you do research. So don't feel bad if you feel like you're still at that early stage learning and making these mistakes. We all make them. We just hopefully through experience learn to identify them and solve them early on. So the superhero mistake is about thinking that your research is the new greatest revolutionary idea, that it's going to solve the world. You think you're great, and it is a good thing to think your research is great. But there's a but. You can't just sell a massive project in terms of a great idea that's going to do all these things and then just run a simple experiment. So again, this aligns to what Bria was talking initially about making sure that what you state in your aims and your methodology and your outcomes all lines up neatly and nicely. So again, it is important to kind of sell this idea of why your research matters in real life, and it is okay to state sort of like that great vision in the beginning of your proposal, but then make sure that you're not saying you're doing things you're not actually doing. And this is about making sure your methods really align with your research outputs and so on. So next slide, again, we make these mistakes, but what are some good ways to go about solving them? So something that I do is, as soon as I have a research proposal, this also works when you're writing papers, for example, just make sure that, that you have that alignment between your justification or aim, your research questions, and obviously the most important bit is that your methods align with what you say you're doing. So a trick that I sometimes use is actually start describing your methods first. I even do it when I write papers. Just write the methods, because methods should be like a cooking recipe, you know, they should be methodical, it's in the word, and they should be quite straightforward. So narrow down what methods that you're going to use and then write the rest of the proposal from those methods. And that's sometimes a really good way to making sure they all align. And I always try to have like sort of like critical thinking questions as I read through my section. So for example, read your research intent once you have a first draft and ask yourself, is it what I really say that I'm trying to achieve feasible with the methods that I have in mind? And if it's not, then you go back and tweak it a bit. Next slide, please. So the second mistake is being a bad salesperson. And I sometimes see this mistake as kind of like the opposite of the superhero. I think some people might be able to do some psychological experiments about this, because I think you're probably the superhero when you have a big ego, and you're probably the bad salesperson when you're a bit sort of like self-conscious or not so confident. But again, this mistake is about not being able to effectively articulate or sell your research idea. Of course, we are doing research, and sometimes research is very blue sky. You're really trying to find answers to big questions, but for most of the work we do, and especially for ACR related projects, your research really is connected to not only a contribution to knowledge, to your field of work, but also to society and to the real world. So make sure you state those contributions. Again, to me, it's equally important to focus on, okay, what everyone else has done in your field and how your research fits in within that field, as well as making very clear how your research can actually impact the real life, you know, the lives of farmers and communities and whatnot. And something to be really careful about is also trying to avoid, you know, what I say in this example is selling half-cooked ideas using flashy trends, topics, or concepts. So this is something that's quite common in my own field of research of climate change. So people like using big words like resilience thinking and social ecological systems and things like that. It is okay to use those concepts, but only if they are core to the work that you're doing. Again, don't sell ideas just because they sound flashy. Use the concepts appropriately. Make sure if you throw in key concepts for your disciplines that they're tightly connected to what you're doing, or that they're thoroughly explained in your rationale. Next slide, please.
I'm trying, Danny.
That gave me time to have a sip of water. So again, how do you avoid being a bad salesperson? One thing I like doing, if you have had not experience with that before, a quick Google search will kind of point you in the right direction. But if you've never worked on theory of changes processes, they're quite neat. It kind of helps you position your work or your research in a broader scheme of things. Let's say you're working on a project on like specific plant pathogen or whatnot. A lot of what Bree does. So in your head, it might look like you're in the lab, you're identifying pathogens, you're doing genetic testing, you're doing a lot of lab work, but obviously your work has implications beyond the lab. You might be working on a crop that has a quite significant economic importance for the countries you're working on. They might have cultural importance or food security importance. And again, with your research, you're putting in a piece of a puzzle that feeds into like larger social and economic development of the agricultural sector. So try to like map how your research fits into broader development areas. And that can help you kind of understand what is your contribution. So what is it that you're bringing into the table, and what is your attribution? That means what is actually what you can claim that you're doing and you are directly influencing through your work. As I said, framing your research in terms of real life issues. Yeah, you might be spending a lot of time in the lab or in the field setting up experiments, but what is the real life issue that you're trying to solve with your work? As I said before, make sure that all the concepts that you use are thoroughly explained and well integrated into your work. And as a final critical question to ask yourself, just ask, how is your research similar or different to what's already been published already? And just asking yourself that question can help you find that niche and that point where you kind of differentiate yourself with your work. Next slide, please. So the third mistake is the squirrel. This is one that I particularly identify myself with. I am a quite distracted person, and sometimes I'm doing multiple things at once, but my brain seems to lag my body a little bit. And this is particularly true when you're writing. Sometimes you get easily distracted, you get sloppy. Keyboards are not really good for people with big clumsy hands, so you're gonna have typos all over your work. You're gonna have missing words, and you probably, as you write, you're trying to flush all your ideas, and there's gonna be a few things that you missed or that you did not explain. So this is a common mistake. I think everyone, it is sometimes a bit of a victim of the squirrel, especially in busy times that we live in. But obviously, this is your one shot to demonstrate you're the best. Do not forget, this is a competitive process. You're competing against other people. So make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. And a pretty easy way to do it is just making sure that your work doesn't have easily corrected mistakes that could have been identified before submitting. So next slide, please. So again, easy tips to solve this issue. Get a friend, or I always say even better, get an enemy to read your work before submitting it, and making sure they actually trying to critique you harshly and trying to find where those mistakes are. Obviously, write your work, and something that I like doing, I always say, let it ferment for a few days. So have your final draft, put it back in your computer, go do something fun, and then look at it with fresh eyes, and that usually helps a lot. Of course, for you to be able to afford doing this, you need to get started earlier to make sure you allow a couple days for you to review a final version. And then obviously there's like levels to this. You can quickly just check for typos or spelling mistakes and things like that. But then another level of editing, it's about really asking yourself if the ideas that you have presented are clear and are well articulated, and if there's anything you can do to improve the efficiency of the text. And by efficiency of the text, is just looking if there's any ways in which you can present an idea in a clearer way with less words. Again, something that's hard for me coming from speaking Spanish, and as you can say, I speak a lot, so I write a lot. So again, the only way of making sure you avoid this is, unfortunately, let things rest for a while and then come back at them with fresh eyes and a new perspective. Next slide, please. So the third mistake, the rule breaker, and I would say, as I was going through the applications last year, I found a lot of like naughty rule breakers. I know sometimes it's okay to break the rules, especially if the rules don't make sense. But in this case, even if the rules don't make sense, they're there for a reason, and they are sort of like the neat box that we have put around these applications to make sure everyone kind of puts together the same standard of work. As Bree has mentioned initially, this research intent form is quite short, so it's quite concrete. You only have in some sections about 300 words or less to explain. So make sure that you follow those rules. If it says 300 words, don't go and write like 10 pages, because then obviously, as for us as reviewers, we'll go and see, look, this is great. This person wrote 10 pages of really awesome stuff, but they needed to do it in 300 words or less. So that's obviously going to annoy the reviewer, but it's also going to kind of put you already in a disadvantage, because as a reviewer, you're already thinking, well, if this person can't really follow basic rules, how are they going to behave in their work and their research? I think there was a mention, Bree, we didn't talk about it, but there is expectations that you're going to use references in the lit review. There's not a specific section for references, but obviously, like, your references should come at the end. They usually don't count as part of the word count, so just include your reference list at the end of the research intent, and obviously your citations as you use them in your lit review section or your methods section, and so on. Next slide, please. All right, so how do you avoid being a rule breaker? I would say it's always really handy to make a checklist, but actually go and tick the boxes. Don't just go and make the checklist and forget about it. And this goes a little bit beyond the research intent form. There's a lot of documentation you need to provide with your application. So as I said before, the first screening we do is eligibility. And if you forgot to include your GPA grades or your diplomas from previous degrees and so on, you're already kind of like failing in the easy tasks. So make sure all the easy tasks are covered, all the documents are there, and that you have made a checklist of all the points that you need to include in your research intent. If you are not sure about a specific requirement for the application or a specific section of your research intent, do reach out and ask in advance. We have an incredibly helpful team. Everyone's always happy to help. So you have multiple avenues. You have the PASCR email. Lisa I have seen she's been pumping up the chat with resources. You can contact us, contact the team, contact your supervisors, contact the universities. Anyway, you have really no excuses for claiming that you didn't understand something. There's no silly questions. So if you really don't know anything about the applications, just ask ahead of time. And then something for you to ask yourself is, as you get started in the process, you decide that you want to apply, start preparing that checklist and making sure that you know what is it that you need to prepare beforehand. You submit a complete application and proposal. Again, time is key in this. Don't leave that for the last minute. If you're going to take some time getting some of these documents, it's good to start really early on. Next slide. So the fourth mistake is the wanderer. This is one that I also associate myself a lot. So again, you have a specific research topic and you're using X treatment on taro plants, but you really want to start your proposal talking about this amazing journey about when taro was first introduced in the Pacific. And again, probably really interesting. I would read it with a lot of interest, but you only have 300 words in some cases. So don't go wander around talking about the history of taro. Really focus on what is it that's going to give the reader the information they need to get to know your work and know what is it that you're doing. Again, this can be a tricky thing to do, but it's a skill, and it's a skill that you learn through practicing. Next slide, please. So again, some quick tricks I use to avoid being a wanderer. Work with outlines. So start developing an argument for each paragraph. I always say, like in the structure of an essay where you have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, in a big essay, you almost have that same structure for every paragraph. So make sure every paragraph you write has an argument. It's clearly articulated, ideally at the beginning of the paragraph, and then you use the middle sentences to justify that argument, and obviously close that argument at the end of each paragraph. Once you have familiarized yourself with the relevant literature, and this can take time, and you have developed your research questions, I would say leave the writing the literature review until the end. This is again a trick I often use. So the literature review has two purposes to me. The first one is to help you narrow your research questions, help you understand how you're going to go about methods and data analysis. So the literature review is an exercise for you to better focus your research and to better help you understand where do you fit within what's already been done. But it also has a second purpose, as the written lit review will give your readers or your evaluators the context that they need to understand your research. So again, as it is probably the first thing you do, but it doesn't necessarily has to be the first thing you write. If you use it to give yourself an idea, write your methods, and then go back to it, you can actually make sure that all the key concepts that you need to include are there after you've written the other sections of your work. And again, a good critical question to ask yourself is, what information do I actually need to provide the reader for them to understand what is it that you're going to achieve? So what are those key concepts, key methods, key developments in the field that you need to make sure the reader knows to understand what is it that you're doing and why is it valuable. Next slide, please. Again, the final mistake, the parrot, and I purposefully use the Fijian parrot just because it's a really cool bird. But so make sure that, again, as we said, it's really, you only have small sections to work on. And it is very easy to fall in love with a particular word, an idea, and then you just go and repeat it in the introduction and the objectives and in the outcome and in the lit review. And again, for you, probably it's not that obvious initially, but for someone who's foreign to your work and is just reading it, it gets really tiring to just read the same thing all over and over again. So again, it's about being efficient with your writing and your work. So next slide. Pretty easy, low-hanging fruit is that software like Word gives us really cool technology. So you can very quickly do like word searches and things like that. I use it very commonly. Like I usually have this inside joke that when I wrote my first thesis, I gave it to my husband to read it. And he said, like, you have like the word integrate after every sentence. And like, I went in and typed it in the word count and I was like, oh God, you're right. It's like, I love that word. So again, very quickly, you can just search for word and it can tell you how many times you've used it and highlighted in the space. So go and use synonyms and go change the word or see if there's any way where you can rephrase that idea without repeating yourself so much. Again, as I said with the squirrel, it always helps to just let the work sit for a while and then come back at it later. And then you'll see, oh God, I've used integrate again like 100 times. So yeah, just give yourself that time to make those improvements. And again, a critical question to ask yourself. This is something I experienced with my own work for my PhD. So I went and wrote my literature review, did all my research, and then when it was time to write my whole thesis document, I went back to my literature review that I had written like probably 2-3 years ago. And like, I remember thinking as I finished it for the first time for my confirmation document, going like, oh, this is pretty neat. This is like, I can't cut it anymore. Like, this is kind of like, it fits, it has everything. And then 3 years later, when I was putting together my thesis, I was like, this is rubbish. I can delete all of these sections. So again, I was only able to do that because I had detached from my text and from my ideas for almost 2 years. And then I could see it with different eyes and understand that a lot of that text was really unnecessary. So again, give yourself the opportunity to do that with your research intent. Next slide, please. So how are we with time? Do you want to do a quick activity or do you want to jump into Q&A?
There's time for an activity.
Okay, cool. So let's do it. So I had a activity using Mentimeter. So if you guys are sitting in front of your screen with a cell phone, you can use the QR code. Otherwise, there's 2 options. If you can click, Bree, maybe you can stop sharing and pop the link on the chat and the code. Otherwise, an easy way to get it is go to menti.com and type in the chat. So I'm gonna wait for Bree to type in those links and codes into the chat for me. All right, so yeah, Bree just popped in the Mentimeter link. So if you use the first link, it'll take you straight to the slide. If you use the second one, you're going to be asked to insert a code. So the code is that number Bree typed in there, 35774530. And I'm going to share my screen. Oh, you guys are really quick. I see some results going in. So everyone can see my screen with the graph bar. Oh, cool. So yeah, I was just really curious to understand which mistake you think you're more likely to fall into. I think I gave you the chance to do more than one. Oh, good to see some fellow squirrels and wanderers out there. Again, really common mistakes we all do. Good to see people in the crowd are not much into breaking rules or having big egos and being the superhero researchers. But yeah, look, really interesting. I think, yeah, those two types of mistakes are quite common in the work that I read and review. And as I said, in my own work as well. So it's always good to be reflective about things you can improve in your own work. Okay, so that was that. And then I just wanted to leave you with, whoops. Next question is, I'm just keen to know, after this presentation, which strategy are you still seeing the presentation? Yeah, there we go. So this should come up. Yeah, excellent. So which strategy are you keen to try to avoid any of the mistakes we discussed today? It's an open-ended question. You can just type in what you are going to try or what you're willing to give it a go as you work on your research intent form. Research. So are you going to research about the mistakes or? Just give it a bit more time for people to fill in. I will follow the rules from now onwards. That's excellent. I don't know if I feel proud about that. As I said, sometimes it is. I think it is okay to break some rules. But yeah, hopefully not for this research intent. Do follow the rules and do make sure you're doing what's being required. Any other quick feedback of things you are going to implement with this research intent? Let's just wait for one more and then we can give my work to several others to read through. Yeah, excellent. Oh, read more, give reader context, prepare well to sell my idea, break rules. No, come on, guys, don't break any rules. Excellent. Yeah, aligning methodology to research question, it's a big one. All right. So I might leave it there. Thank you for your feedback and participating in this session. And we might open it up for like a quick Q&A.
Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask Danny or myself? We will go through the chat as well, but I'll read through the chat and someone can ask the question live if they wish.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
This is Aradhna. I just wanted to clarify a few things regarding the scholarship, actually. Is it possible?
Yes.
So if we apply for the scholarship, it can be either for University of the South Pacific and Fiji National University, or it just have to be University of the South Pacific.
Linda?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Hi, Aradhna. Yes, it's open for both Fiji National University and the University of the South Pacific.
But only those two universities.
Yes, only those two.
My next question is, if a student's GPA was not that good during maybe undergraduate or postgraduate, but the student have a experience, working in experience of 10 years, say, is that possible? Is there that some kind of assessment that can be, it's available? Because I know someone who was trying to get the GPA, but was told that the GPA is not good, so does not qualify for the, it does not qualify for the to be registered in the program.
I think, Aradna, the first thing to do, unless you've already done this, is to speak to either Mr. Joseph Atta Katha, who is here today at USP, or to Dr. Archibald Bakare at FNU. And those details we'll put in the chat as well of who to contact to check whether you are eligible, or if it's for yourself or for someone else. Or have you already done that, Aradna?
Already done that.
Okay.
So I was, I did check with Mr. Dwapata, so
Mhm.
Mr. Dava, and the thing was that my GPA is not up to par for my undergraduate, but
Okay.
with I have got that background experience working in the field.
Right.
Yeah. So I was wondering if this, the section while you do the assessment for the scholarship that can be considered.
Right. I think that would really be a question for USP, if it's USP in particular that you're interested in.
Yeah, maybe just to add there, like GPA requirements for scholarships are there. I know it's a number, and sometimes you would have different experience, but it is just a way for the selection panel to know that you can perform at a certain standard at an academic institution, and so they're the cutoffs for making sure that you can demonstrate that you can operate at that high level in an academic setting.
Thanks, Danny. And I think they are also requirements of admission to the program. So not just for the scholarship, but also for admission to the HDR program at the university.
So there was a comment in the chat about if we can apply for research grants. So perhaps it's important to clarify that the scholarship covers your stipend. So that's for you to fund your living expenses while you do research, but also quite generous, so like operational funding grant for you to actually conduct your research. So yeah, like research grants are part of the scholarship program.
But that after you go through your confirmation of candidature or the research proposal is accepted, then there's availability of the finances, is my understanding.
Yes, that's right, Bree.
Are there any other questions, live questions to ask Danny or myself about the research intent? Yes, Amelia?
Good afternoon. I just have a question regarding the literature review. Like, since we'll be inserting like citations, like can we exceed like to 400 words? Like when it comes, because the maximum is 300 words, but when we put in citation, it's add more of the word. Like the citations, when we add on the citation, does that count as the 300 or?
Amelia, we need to modify the form, but given that the literature review is only 300 words, that will also limit the number of citations that you have. But no, they won't be counted towards 300 words in text or in your reference list. So
in text, like it will be counted, that citation that you put?
no.
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 Okay.
So if you're citing Medina and Wilson, that reference won't be counted in the 300 words.
Okay, thank you.
And can I also add, I mean, I think the 300 words it's not incredibly strict. I think it's a guideline to let you know that you can't write 10 to 15 pages, but don't feel that you have to count every word that you're putting in there. We're definitely not as strict as that.
Yeah, just be mindful again. There's a big gap between 300 to 600 words
yeah.
and 10 pages.
That's right.
So just be reasonable with what you do. But I think it is a skill to make you
Yes.
be really concise about your work. And again, when it comes to references, there's no need to put multiple references for one idea at this point. It is not a full research proposal. It's not about proving that you know the wealth of your literature. Is about making sure you know those key references. So if you have multiple references for one point, I would suggest just use the most relevant one, because then that shows us and shows the readers that you kind of know what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
I think Penaya had a hand up.
Yeah, Bulabinaka.
Nizamula.
Yeah, I just have a question, ma'am. If you are applying for a scholarship at USP, like the beginning of the presentation, that you need to meet your supervisors, eh? I mean, you have to meet your supervisors and contact them often. So does that mean you need to contact your supervisor only in USP and not FNU? Is that right?
So depending on perhaps Linda can better answer the question, but
Sorry.
depending on the topic, there are supervisors allocated to that particular topic. So that will be your guide for whether you contact USP or FNU. Sometimes it is not across both universities. Linda, I'll let you.
Yeah, certainly. I think for both universities, the first thing to do is to contact the relevant supervisor and the Australian co-supervisor, who is nominated on the research project list that you should be able to find on all the websites that we have available. And the first thing to do is to identify who to contact and then make that initial email contact. Are you interested in FNU?
USP.
And USP, okay.
Yes.
So it's appropriate to both universities to contact the supervisors to discuss the proposal.
Okay.
But you've
If,
checked your eligibility first of all, Penai?
Yes.
Oh, great.
So there were two really good questions in the chat that we might have a look at. So one said, do we need to meet the research project objectives for the intent, and does the application allow for further details that are existing gaps in the project area? So I think that's a neat question. I would say, so you have the section where you write about your research aim and objectives. I suppose that's where you have to be quite clear about what is it that you're doing. And existing gaps in the project area is something you can cover in the lit review section, or depends on how you frame it. You could also phrase it in the significance of the study part. If there's like a need for a specific methodology that you're developing or using, that would be the section to kind of note it as well. But yeah, use those background sections, the research aim section and the lit review, to address those gaps in the literature or in your field of research.
And also do remember that there is some flexibility in the topic. So if you contact one of the supervisors and say, this is really interesting, but what I want to do is put this twist on this topic, is that possible? Then by having that communication with that supervisor, maybe you can target a slightly different area to what was requested in the research topic area, but still be able to achieve their overall project, ACR project goals, or fit into them best.
There was another question saying, is there any way that we can access full articles for our research proposal, especially for the literature part? I find that's a really good question. So my intuitive response would be, if you're already a student with USP or FNU, you should be able to have access to library resources. If you're not a student, but you're still getting into that work, I would suggest you can do searches, and then the titles that you can not access in full text, ask your supervisors. All academics have access to essentially all literature available. So I would say if you're struggling finding full text, if you're not a student and don't have access to full library, do ask your supervisors to quickly flick you those references so you can read them in full, I would say. There was another question saying, I have submitted my concept note to principal, supervisor, and co-supervisors. I've received feedback from both of them. However, there has been not any feedback from the ACR supervisor despite 2-3 emails. Mary Johnson. So as Bree said at the beginning, we're all pretty busy academics, so do be a little bit patient with those responses from the Australian academics. I don't know if there's any way where we can follow up a little bit with that, Lisa or Linda, but yeah, just be mindful. Sometimes people have really busy schedules or holidays or things like that. But yeah, just keep trying to reach out.
We are out of time, everyone. Are there any? It's probably time for one more question. Otherwise, emails can be sent to the PASCR email. There's one more question in the chat.
Sci-Hub, that's a controversial question to ask. And since we're being recorded, I'm going to say do not use Sci-Hub. Yeah, look, as I said, there's other ways in which you can access full resources through your university library and your supervisors, but yeah, I can't endorse Sci-Hub, but yeah, just make sure you go through the legal ways first. I'm pretty sure your supervisors would be happy to help sending you references. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. Linda, is there another session coming up for the school? I didn't think so.
No, we don't have another session at the moment.
Okay.
We're planning another session just probably the week before applications close, so that we can outline again exactly what the application, how it should be submitted, in what format, and that sort of thing, to avoid people rushing at the very last minute and then submitting multiple documents and not using the sort of right naming convention. So we're planning just a last minute Zoom in the last week before things close.
But do go away and contact your potential supervisors today and start that process now. And good luck to everyone.
Yeah, looking forward to see some of you as scholars in the next intake. We are pretty privileged that we get to develop a quite close relationship with the scholars. So you do become part of a really privileged, well-supported team. So do make your effort to do your best in this application, because it's really worth it when you're able to join the family. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you next year.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.